start this evening by welcoming you all here to join us in the fourth of our series on active environmentalism. It's an opportunity for us all to spend an hour or so midweek just to take stock, really, of the changing landscape around us, to understand a bit more about the diversity or shrinking diversity in many, many instances, and also something that we can do about it. And we've addressed questions around the ocean, biodiversity through rewilding. And tonight, it's a really special moment, actually, because we have two ways of looking at it. One of the things that came across very strongly last week was this question of aesthetics, really how we shifted our perception of what beauty is. And we often think about beauty in trees and lakes and so forth, but real beauty, as you're about to find out, can be seen in the wildflower meadows, which have been captured so beautifully by Hugo Rittson Thomas, whose career actually started in art. So he's well placed to judge with that eye. And of course, this narrative of understanding plants and meadows couldn't be better expressed than in the hands of Sir Ghillean Prance, who joins us here as well. So it is with two wonderful experts, actually, that I thought we would spend this evening in their company, talking backwards and forwards, both about the project in particular and about the principles in general behind the significance. And I'll hand over to them with one headline thought in your mind, which you, I hope, have picked up, is that since 1937, and this is Plantlife will record this for you, 97% of the wildflower meadows in this country have disappeared through plough and through fair means and foul, so we say. So, and it's a curve which is just beginning to show signs of a rebound. So thank you very much for joining us here this evening. Hugo, Sir Ghillean, thank you both very, very much. And I have to say, of all of our talkers, you are by far the most organized. We have a fabulous presentation that you put together. So when you're ready and you'd like me to, I'm here at your service to press go.
Well, thank you very much. I am really, really pleased to have come across this book, Wildflowers for the Queen. It is a wonderful book, and Hugo, congratulations on this book. To me, as a botanist, it really brings the beauty of the wildflowers that I so love, but it is also so aesthetic. It's a real work of art. I've never seen wildflowers portrayed in such an artistic way, because not only have you got beautiful photos of the meadows, but you've got dissections of plants spread out in a wonderful way. So thank you very much for this book. We need to ask a little bit about the book. How did you get involved in this sort of project and into this particular subject?
Well, it came about really at a charity dinner given by Plantlife at the Chelsea Physic Gardens. And they laid out their case so strongly. I really had one of those awful moments. You have a lump in your throat and a twist in your stomach. And I realized it was a call to arms. I couldn't bear the thought of these incredible plants being made extinct. And there was quite a long list already of extinct flowers and plants, including, in fact, at that time, they believed the monkey orchid had been made extinct, I think up to 1952, and a tiny colony was then discovered. And it just felt wrong that though we are doing a wonderful job, with the large famous mammals such as the rhinos overseas, that here these often invisible small heroes were being trampled, literally. And it seems crazy when they're so beautiful and that everyone loves them. I mean, everyone I met walking through these meadows, they absolutely felt a sense of belonging and of respect for them. And so in a way, the idea was to make the invisible more visible, turn the flowers more into, supermodels of the book, and try and change in the long term the legal status that belongs to wildflowers. I mean, there was a famous case last year whereby some guy whose life was being blocked by 5 trees in his garden. So he owned the trees, was his garden, chopped them down, and he ended up with a fine for £170,000.
Wow.
Whereas the last remaining hay meadow, traditional hay meadow in Britain, which is Marden Meadow in Kent, which I was lucky enough to visit, it's generally unprotected. You could plow it up in a morning, and often hundreds of years of nature's work, in fact, our heritage, would be destroyed. So I was hoping in a very minor way to at least bring some awareness to the problem and some more appreciation of these natural wonders that we have in this country.
I'm interested that you mentioned extinction. I wrote a book, edited a book in 1976 called Extinction is Forever. And my regret is that we still have species going extinct. We were talking about it that long ago, but we're not making much progress yet. So meadows that are helping at least some of the wildflowers not going extinct are so important.
Yes. Well, Ghillean, you are one of the great legends in a way, I would say, up there with Sir David Attenborough, having been a director of the New York Botanical Gardens, director of Kew Gardens, one of the rare recipients of a gold medal of the Royal Geographical Society. I mean, the list goes on. So I'm fascinated how you became interested in the British wildflowers and are now president of the Wildflower Society.
Well, it's basically, I think, because I grew up in wild areas. As my young childhood was in the Isle of Skye, and then in Gloucestershire and the Cotswolds. So I had the privilege of being around the wildflowers and got interested in them. And then various people stimulated my interest in this. And I began to compile a list of every flower and bird I saw as I became a naturalist at first and gradually got more interested. So it was the wildflowers of Britain that began my career in botany, and this led on to all the work I've done in the Amazon rainforest.
Well, and no doubt you have a favourite from your time as a youngster.
Well, as I certainly did, but one of the things that influenced me as a youngster was my aunts, and I wonder if we could look at the slide of a diary that was kept by my aunt in 1930. This is the Wildflower Society that you're seeing now, of which I'm president. And in the magazine here, I wrote a review of your book. This here is a Wildflower Society diary. And the Wildflower Society encourages people to record all the flowers they see in a year. Well, I was very fortunate to have 2 aunts who were very keen amateur botanists. And this is Aunt Gertrude's diary from 1930. You can see that she traveled a bit. She looked at wildflowers in Switzerland, in Chatsworth, in France. So she got around a bit in 1930. But she made me join the Wildflower Society, I think, when I was 11. And so the next slide will show my diary in 1953 and 1954, doing exactly the same sort of thing. Now, Aunt Gertrude said to me, you don't call that plant a daisy, you call it Bellis perennis. And so from my childhood, when I was around early teenage, I was learning to call plants by their Latin names. So that really built up my interest in the British flora, and it led on to my desire to become a botanist. And because I was collecting all these things around the country, the exploration side appealed to me. And that's how I ended up becoming an explorer of the Amazon rainforest.
That's amazing.
Yes, well, that's an incredible connection with your aunt, and funny enough, I'd heard it. It's really remarkable. But don't try me on the Latin names, please, Ghillean.
Well, in your book, you have used a great deal of Latin names, and I must say they're all accurate. So that compliments you on your use of Latin names. Something I like in your book is that you also managed to get some very influential people to write bits in it. How did you manage to contact all these people to contribute these various?
Well, I think it reflects as much on the love of wildflowers. I mean, everyone has this image of England's green and pleasant land, or the sceptred isle from Shakespeare. So it appeals to our romanticism. And Julian Fellowes had been in a previous book, in fact, and is well known for his love of his own meadow. So as Highclere Castle is in the book, he was keen to write about the Downton, effectively the Downton Meadow at Highclere, which they started during the filming. And then Richard E. Grant is also a great lover of the flowers himself, and we're very, very lucky in that regard. So many people absolutely adore them, and you can see why. They are gorgeous, but at the same time, I mean, Johnny was saying just before we started that there are two levels of aestheticism here: the beauty that you see, and that which is unseen, the invisible, because the hard work they do on behalf of human beings, the life support chains, the biodiversity, and having, I think it's 1,400 pollinators, they are absolutely vital. So it's a sort of triple win situation, I think. And I think when, John, if you could play the video now, I think we now have one of these.
Nestled in a valley beside the River Swale, Muka is a landscape of flowers, a ribbon of 12 meadows carpeting the valley floor and creating a floral paradise like nowhere else in Britain. And scattered across the valley are ancient stone barns that once stored hay from the meadows. Solid and belligerent in this otherwise soft landscape, they remind us of the close but delicate bond between wildflower meadows and farming. If we get that balance wrong, we can destroy these meadows in the blink of an eye. Muka is utterly fabulous, but it's also utterly heartbreaking, for this is what we've lost.
So that is Professor Trevor Dines from the charity Plantlife, who I work closely with. And I think that meadow, Muka, which is in North Yorkshire, was my equal favourite. The thing I discovered after travelling all around the country, Cornwall in the west, Mull in the north, Sandringham obviously in the east, is each of them have their own different character, has a different personality, partially due to the soil type, partially the climate, what nature can provide for in those areas. But Muka, I arrived and it was a typical Yorkshire day, in fact. So though it was the middle of summer, it felt like winter. I didn't have enough clothes. It was grey, damp, drizzling, a complete waste of time for a photographer. But the next day, luckily the forecast was correct. So, it's quite a narrow window, I guess, on a wildflower meadow, because you've got to try and hit it when the flowers are close to their best and the conditions for photographing it are at least reasonable. And they certainly were, but those high hills you saw in the video, carpeted in shadow until the sun rose, and then this magic revealed itself. And it just, firstly, you realize the meadows are in the same position as the photographer. They rely entirely on light. That's all I can photograph. And at the same time, the soundtrack as the day woke up was incredible. I mean, it's the busiest wildflower meadow I think I've been in. And Mucra is dates from the Viking invasions. I think in Yorkshire it's 890 AD. So it's very ancient to us, but Mucra actually translates as new narrow pasture. So it was brand new, roughly 1200 years ago. And to say it could be plowed up in a morning. So
yeah.
And my feeling was an emotional response, which was, thank God I've taken on this quite daunting challenge, because anyone who experiences them will have a life-changing epiphany, really, and you can't help but fall in love with them. I just thought, well, if I drop dead for some terrible reason, I can't think of a place on earth that's closer to paradise.
I'm interested to know which of all these meadows was your favorite one, and also something I noticed in your book is that you seem to have a great love of orchids. You featured some some of the rarest orchids in the country, and certainly orchids are something I've collected a lot of in the Amazon rainforest. Do orchids have a special meaning to you that you've got so many in your book?
Well, I think so, Ghillean. I mean, now, could we have them? No, that's great, Johnny. That's perfect. I'd only seen the normal orchids that you generally see, perhaps common spotted, not really very many. So when I came across my first bee orchid, I was astonished. And historically in Europe, it was a very clever flower because it looked like a bee to attract the bee for mating and pollination. That may have historically changed now, but the three favorites probably were the man and lady orchid, which this slide is the lady orchid, at Ranscombe in Kent, and one of the Plantlife flagship meadows. And it's quite big. It's sort of 3 foot high. So actually, it was the very first photo shoot I went on for the book. Very excited, and I suppose I've done 4 or 5 garden books, and I was expecting a different challenge, but not to that extent. Which is, at least with the garden book, you can find the garden. It's been cleverly designed and planted, and very well maintained. Well, unfortunately, the GPS coordinates at Ranscombe took me not to this wonderful lady orchid, but to a equally 3 foot high fence post, and I just couldn't find the flower. And I literally thought I've had it with this project. I've bitten off more than I can chew. I eventually found one as darkness set in, so too late for photography, but I was up at 4 the next morning, set up beautifully, light just rising nicely as forecast. I was happy as Larry, and suddenly there's this sort of crash bang wallop. I couldn't think what on earth was going on, and it was a herd of deer came through, took out the lady orchid. I mean, absolutely flattened it. There was no rescuing it, and it just made me appreciate how exciting it is and different working with nature, which is wild and unpredictable, and that's one of the great joys. But you have quite an interest in orchids, as you say, Ghillean. And how does the Wildflower Society work?
Well, the Wildflower Society produces. It exists really to interest amateur botanists, amateur people in plants, and so it organizes field trips, very nice trips to see rare plants. It encourages people to keep the wildflower diaries. And we also give a prize every year jointly with the Botanical Society of the British Isles to the best publication on British flowers in each year. And so there's always great interest in that. So I think it is encouraging more people to get truly interested in flowers. And one of the things I'm trying to do as president is see that they get more interested, not just in collecting them, but in seeing the conservation of them. And so the sort of things in your book about the conservation of these wildflowers is so important, and that's something that the Wildflower Society certainly finds very important too.
So that's the man orchid, in fact, and which I referred to, and it's at Gravesend in Kent, on the outskirts, therefore, of a small town. This bank on the left, in fact, was used for anti-aircraft guns in the Second World War. So it's had quite a checkered history, but now it has come back, left to its own devices, and nature's powers of restoration, if given half a chance, are incredible. And it's just the most beautiful sight. If you go to the next slide as well, so you can see on the left, it really is quite manly, minus perhaps one appendage. But they are absolutely gorgeous. And next slide, please, Johnny. Was my favorite. I read that it was extinct, and it was extinct until 1952. One tiny colony was again found in Kent, and you know, when you see the bright colours in the English countryside and realise it's one of our natives, and that this is what we'd wiped out, it just worked as a call to arms for me. And I hope, you know, one or two of these images will at least, you know, tell the story of 1,000 words. So
I'm glad that you're showing us one of the most exciting restorations. This is the sort of thing that excited me, and it is very nice to see the way you illustrated it in the book. You've got it in the wild there, and you've got the individual plants very close up, and you see the features of the monkey in it, which I like. It's got the legs, it's even got the monkey's tail in it. It's a wonderful orchid. I was able to visit it with the professor that taught me botany at Oxford, at the other side of it in Buckinghamshire. And it was indeed just about extinct, and it's coming back. This gives us the opportunity to promote much more conservation and reintroduction of things, planting of more trees, creation of more meadows. And I'm very glad that you're trying to do that through this book. Could you tell us a little bit about how you made those displays of the various plants?
Well, from a photographic point of view, obviously I couldn't go near the plant, so that's quite a long lens. You know, I had to leave, you know, zero footprint really. So it's a very long lens, and then the rest is done in, you know, in post production, using all those cunning tools. And you know, I can see why, having photographed so many meadows, why all my sort of flower photo heroes like Irving Penn, Horst P. Horst, or I suppose Nick Knight now in his wonderful Flora book. I mean, I can see why they only work really in studios, because you need to be able to control the wind, otherwise it's out of focus, as we know, and also the light issues. So I had a bit of a mobile studio I would carry around to try and control the light a bit, but at a distance, sufficient distance not to have any impact at all, you know, on the flowers. And then the others were shot on light boxes in the studio, where I know my wife and I said, well, we had to wear these very soft slippers because any vibration on the floor, and these super macro shots again thrown out of focus. So it was an interesting challenge. Yeah.
Stunning.
Your book is called Wildflowers for the Queen. I think perhaps we should tell everybody a little bit about Coronation Meadows. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
Well, you know, absolutely. I mean, the weird thing is, in the very year I went to the Plantlife Flower Power charity dinner, I photographed the Queen, commissioned for her longest reign, and so this transition from our great national icon to a more natural heritage icon seemed quite a natural one. And Prince Charles, of course, is president of Plantlife, has written a very good foreword in the book, and his passion is, is genuine. It really is. And luckily, he allowed us to photograph the Wildflower Meadow at Highgrove, which I think hasn't had that much attention. The gardens have had, a lot more, as we know, but the Wildflower Meadow hadn't really. And it's incredible. I think there were over 7,000 orchids. The bee orchid came from Highgrove, and he also arranged for us to shoot at Sandringham. So that was quite an exciting adventure. I'm glad to say the weather was perfect at Sandringham, so I didn't want to disappoint the Queen with her particular Coronation Meadow. I mean, I think in the end there are probably three types of meadow my sort of basic photographer, as opposed to botanist, had, which was the re-established ones, which actually Highgrove, Sandringham, and indeed Chatsworth are. Chatsworth perhaps being equally famous because anyone who went to the Chelsea Flower Show, I should have checked, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago now, when Chatsworth and Dan Pearson won the coveted top prize, was with the garden from Chatsworth. So when I went back there to photograph it, as the Duke of Devonshire is very much restoring the garden in a modern way with Wildflower Meadows, I couldn't believe that this enormous garden from Chelsea, with about a 20-ton boulder in the middle of it, was back in place at Chatsworth. The sort of traditional Coronation Meadows, though, are, for instance, Mooka that we saw, and perhaps another extreme would be Jones Hill Meadow in Herefordshire, which, just the sheer scale of it, you realise what this country must have looked like, before the dig for victory, World War II. Just field after field of colour. It's just completely dazzling, and really quite noisy because of all the wildlife that is benefiting, us and all the crops within those. And I think probably Highclere Castle falls into that category as well. And then finally is the brand new ones, which is leads us back to your question in that it was the Queen's Meadow, which was the 90th meadow restored by Plantlife. It's in Green Park, so looks down on Buckingham Palace appropriately at the Queen, and is quite a wonder. Highgrove, and then we'll get to.
Yes, I visited that meadow at Highgrove several times, and it is wonderful. Yeah. And Chatsworth too brings back many memories. It's a wonderful meadow.
And yes, the weather was good at Sandringham.
Well, Chatsworth has an Amazon connection too.
Next.
It's where they also first cultivated the great Amazon water lily, Victoria amazonica at Chatsworth.
Oh my God! In the greenhouses there.
In the greenhouse there, yeah.
Which are amazing. So that's part of the Chelsea Flower Show site there. That's a sculpture rear left, the tree, sort of this rather amazing burnt trunk. Was Jones Hill that I was mentioning, and
look at all those orchids.
Yeah. So there's Highclere and the unofficial Downton Abbey, caught it on a moody, misty morning. And the next one is also Highclere, beautifully moody, romantic morning. And then finally we're on to the Queen's Meadow that I've just been talking about. So apologies for that. Got ahead of myself. So I like the fact you have, the red buses and the clearly visible arches of the RAF memorial and all the traffic whizzing around Hyde Park next to this meadow. So it is possible. And being the 90th meadow, it was opened by Prince Charles and the Queen on her 90th birthday. So the sort of link between the commission of her longest reign to the 90th meadow on her birthday seemed complete at that point.
It's so wonderful to have a meadow there in the middle of a city. Green spaces in cities are so important today. And so I think this is one of the most important of all these meadows.
I was thinking that.
I agree. And of course, Prince Charles cleverly got a lot of the local schools involved as part of their biology lessons. And so they planted it with the seeds. So come back and visit it, regularly. Excited to see how it can actually happen, just like that, in the middle, as you say, of London. It was a lucky moment, which couldn't be any more London, as the lifeguards go past Buckingham Palace next to the Queen's Meadow. Yeah.
Well, I tell you something at Kew. When I was director of Kew, we started working with butterfly conservation and leaving some of the areas that had been lawns to grow up. And then I started getting rude letters saying, don't you have enough money to mow your lawns now? And we were very excited by the increase in the species of butterflies coming in at Kew. So I put up notices in it after that. I realized the mistake. We put up notices. This is for butterfly conservation. Then I started getting very complimentary letters that we were leaving this lawn to become butterfly conservation. So I had a little experience of trying to create meadows while I was director of Kew, and it was interesting to see the public's reaction to that. But again, we involved school children with that, and they had a wonderful time looking at the insects in the meadow.
Gillian, I love that idea of perceptions changing. It says so much about where we are right now, doesn't it? People understanding things differently.
It does, that's right.
So Gillian, your Wildflower Society president, are there any particular aims for the next year or two? And by the way, thank you for the incredible magazine. If anyone hasn't seen it, it's the most beautiful magazine you will ever see.
I think that what is most important is that we just encourage everybody to get interested in creating new meadows. That's not primarily a task of the Wildflower Society, but it is of Plantlife that we see on the screen now. Incidentally, I have been involved with Plantlife since it began. We had a planning meeting about this new plant-based charity in my office at Kew, and some of the early founders of it. And I've been a member of Plantlife ever since. But what is important is that Plantlife is encouraging people to plant these new meadows. If you want to do it, you need land, but we can do a great deal by leaving bits of our lawns too. It's simple. And I think one of the things that is most important, that everybody has the opportunity can do something for conservation in the patch of land that they happen to have control of, whether it's a tiny garden or a large field in some of these wonderful areas that have been recreated since.
No, that's absolutely right. Maybe Richard E. Grant should have the last word then, Johnny, which is the slide before, which is a video, in fact.
Here we go.
In the gently undulating folds of the Kent countryside, Ranscombe Farm is a botanical box of delights.
There are dark, towering coppices of sweet chestnut trees, woods that whisper in the breeze, wide open fields full of sun and barley, and carpets of fragrant grassland sparkling with colour. But above all, Ranscombe is a poem to the orchid. There are many beautiful verses: bee orchids, common spotted orchids, man orchids. Ranscombe has something for everyone.